Hi, my name is Rumi. Welcome and welcome back to Start Pages. I apologize for this being the intro clip, but unfortunately, the intro clip that I did film seems to have disappeared. Anyway, my original intention for this vlog was to read and review all the NetGalley arcs I had from 2023 that I hadn't, read and reviewed yet. Before January 22nd, because that was the first day of classes for semester 2. Unfortunately, I did not succeed. Anyway, in this clip here, I'm reading the first arc, which is The Build Up by Tati Richardson, which is an adult romance book. And unfortunately, I DNF'd this book. So I wasn't a fan of this from the get-go. The writing felt amateurish, like a first draft, and there was a lot of telling and not showing. There were multiple times the author mentioned how great a connection the MCs had, and I wasn't seeing it. I wasn't feeling it. And for a romance book, that's a big, big negative. In the books, it's not going in the book's favor. Also, there were times where the characters would mention how something was very funny or it was hilarious, or the author would write them laughing at a scene or laughing at something they said to each other. And I would have to be flipping back and forth trying to find the joke. And I never found the joke. And then it pissed me off because it's not funny. So why are they laughing? And one or two times I could get over it, but I didn't have to book at like 30%. And in that 30%, they laughed at so many things. And none of them were ever funny. And then the female main character is a plus size black woman. And the author would write scenes where the female MC had to just like go around living her daily life as a black woman. Like there was a scene where her best friend, who is a straight size person, they went to a restaurant and the best friend chose the seats and she chose a booth because has a preference of booths, and her best friend just slid in and started talking, and then in the MC's head she had to mention how she had to suck in to fit, and her best friend didn't even notice because she just lives her life, whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then we had like antagonistic characters who would make assumptions about the female MC's love life or sex life, like, oh, she probably doesn't have that many choices, or should be flattered that anybody's interested in her. And then the main character in her head would be like, oh, I have a roster and they just think because people are fat, they don't have any choices, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, cool. Loving the positive rep. And then it just started to feel like a weird hyper focus from the author's perspective. Like there would be so many scenes where everything is normal and then the author brings up the character's weight out of nowhere and like actually does nothing with the fact that she brought up the character's weight. So there was no reason to bring up the character's weight, and it started to feel like even the author had a negative view of her size, and I'm like, we didn't need to do all of this. But anyway, yes, I DNF'd. So that's the first review of this video. Okay, first we're going to talk about the book that I'm reading in this clip at school, which as you watch me, you're going to notice I'm obviously not enjoying. So this is The Camp by Nancy Bush, which is an adult horror thriller. And I also DNF'd this book because I was neither horrified nor was I thrilled. Once again, just like the build up, I started reading it and immediately knew I was not gonna like it, but I tried to give it a shot anyways, and I ended up just wasting my time. The writing was also amateurish, but like horribly so. And it's very surprising because I looked up Nancy Bush on Goodreads and she seems to have other books that a lot of people seem to like, but the writing in this book was so terrible. There were like, I'm thinking back, I'm looking at the review I have written here, and I'm also thinking back on my reading experience and like watching the clip, and I was so pissed off. I was so upset with this book, but there were so many POVs. A lot of them were unnecessary. We would have a chapter of a random character and never hear from them again or never hear about them again, and I'm wondering, why do we need that? Because they didn't even add a perspective that we wouldn't have gotten from like the main character, right? So what was the point? And then there were so many random storylines or plot lines from just the 25% I read. Was it 25, 30? I don't know. I remember I set a baseline where I couldn't DNF because I wanted to DNF this book from the first chapter. But I was like, no, I have to read it until at least, I think it was 25 or 30. And there were so many random plot lines. Like the character that we were introduced in the first chapter, after something happens at the camp, I should probably give you a synopsis of this book. But hold on. After we're introduced to the character at the camp, we get told that somebody attacks her, and then like in the future she's suffering from a traumatic brain injury, and her brain never really matured past, or she regressed to like a childhood state of mind, but she wants to be like a surrogate for her sister, and everybody's like, oh no, you can't do that, da, 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 da. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then there's like a cat who lives at her assisted living home, who they say is like predicting death of people because old people live there. And then there's like the camp had closed down for like 20 years after the initial incident of the main character being there because somebody got murdered there, and it was a bag of things, and I did not care, and they never had any connection. So let me give you the official synopsis so you can know what I'm talking about. The official synopsis from Goodreads says that there are always stories told around the fire at summer camp, tall tales about gruesome murders and unhinged killers concocted to scare new arrivals and lend an extra dose of excitement to those hormone-charged nights. At Camp Loft Shack, nicknamed Camp Love Shack, there are stories about a creeping fog that brings death with it. But here, they're not just they're not just campfire tales. Here, the stories are real. 20 years ago, a girl's body was found on a ledge above the lake, arms crossed over her heart. Some said it was a part of a suicide pact, connected to the nearby Haven commune. Brooke, Rona, and Wendy were among the teenagers at camp that summer, looking for fun and sun, sex and adventure. They never they've never breathed a word about what really happened or about the night their friendship shattered. Now the camp, renamed Camp Fog Lake, has reopened for a new generation, and many of those who were there on the long ago night are returning for an alumni weekend. But something is stirring at the lake again. As the fog rolls in, evil comes with it. Those stories were a warning and they didn't listen, and the only question is, who will live long enough to regret it? That sounded so excited, and then it wasn't. So yeah. Also, I forgot to give you the official synopsis for the build up. So, a truly unfortunate first day of work leads to an unexpected love in the sparkling debut from Romance in Color podcast co host Tati Richardson. Rumpled and ragged was not how architect Ari James envisioned kicking off her first day at a new firm. And few things can top the horror of her new and extremely hot colleague walking in on her at her worst moment ever. Learning that she'll be working with him on the project that's supposed to get her career back on top makes it harder than ever to focus on her big comeback. With a partnership at his firm on the line, nothing is going to stand in the way of Porter Harrison absolutely killing it on his new project. Not his obnoxious rival, not his unpredictable brother, and definitely not his new coworker whose gorgeous curves he accidentally saw and now can't get out of his head. Though neither of them is looking for love, once their creative juices get flowing, Ari and Porter's connection is obvious. But when their shared goal has always been winning at work, building a solid foundation for a relationship might end up costing them everything. Once again, a synopsis that sounded great and the book did not deliver. Now, while I have your attention, let's talk about an arc which I did not DNF, and I actually ended up loving it. I actually read this one before the build up, but I read it in one sitting and forgot to record. So this is Give Me a Sign by Anna Sortino, and it's a young adult contemporary romance, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. The synopsis for this one says Lila is stuck in the middle. At least that's what having hearing loss seems like sometimes, when you don't feel deaf enough to identify as deaf or hearing enough to meet the world's expectations. But this summer, Lila is ready for a change. When Lila becomes a counselor at a summer camp for the deaf and blind, her plan is to brush up on her ASL. Once there, she finds a community. There are cute British lifeguards who break hearts but not rules. A YouTuber who's just a bit desperate for clout, the campers Lila's responsible for and overwhelmed by, and then there's Isaac, the dreamy deaf counselor who volunteers to help Lila with her signing. Romance was never on the agenda, and Lila's not positive Isaac likes her that way, but all signs seem to point to love, unless she's reading them wrong. One thing's for sure, Lila wants to change, and things here are certainly different than what she's used to. Yeah, so as I said, I really enjoyed this book and I binged it in one sitting. The characters, the romance, and the discussions were quite amazing to read. I really enjoyed seeing different characters with different thoughts and feelings towards their deafness, interacting with both deaf and hearing communities. I empathized with Lila when she expressed feelings of wishing she was fully deaf to make it easier to fit into parts of the deaf community or for hearing people to not underestimate her disability. While I'm not deaf, I do find myself having similar thoughts about my own diagnoses from time to time. And I, from a hearing perspective, felt the way the author wrote the interactions in this book, either between a hearing and deaf character or a deaf and deaf character, did a good job of exposing readers both to the issues the deaf community faces, as well as how communicating with other deaf people can be an entirely different and refreshing experience without feeling like the story was being paused to educate readers. I felt a sense of pride reading Lila's grasp and usage of ASL expand as the story went on. The characters in this book were so well written and they practically jumped off the page. Their varying personalities and the different dynamics and friendships being formed were a treat to read. Like, I really love them. Finally, the romance in this book was quite cute and I was rooting for it from the start. I love the development and the few bumps in the road were handled very well and written very realistically. I highly recommend Give Me a Sign. I don't know about the books I mentioned before. Nope. Okay, here I am being a scholar and paying attention in my lecture. For this clip, I have good news. I actually finished this arc and I gave it 5 stars, so it was my first 5 star of the year. This book is Threads That Bind by Kika Hatsupolu. Descendants of the Fates are always born in threes, one to weave, one to draw, and one to cut the threads that connect people to the things they love and to life itself. The Aura sisters are no exception. Ayo, the youngest, uses her fate-born abilities as a private investigator in the half-sunken city of Alante. But her latest job leads her to a horrific discovery. Somebody's abducting women, maiming their life threads, and setting the resulting wraiths loose in the city to kill. To find the culprit, she must work alongside Eddie Runa, the right hand of the infamous Mob Queen, and the boy with whom she shares a rare fate thread, linking them as soulmates before they even met. The investigation turns personal when Ayo's estranged oldest sister shows up on the arm of her best suspect. Amid unveiling secrets from her past and her growing feelings for Eddie, Ayo must follow clues to the city's darkest corners and unearth a conspiracy that involves some of the city's most powerful players before destruction comes to her doorstep. Unlike some other arcs, which I will not mention, I immediately fell in love with this book. The writing drew me in on Ayo's perspective, and Ayo herself were as a character were also so interesting. I love the relationship between Ayo and Ava, the love that was very obvious between them. Ava is the middle sister, by the way, so she's older than Ayo. The fact that Ayo very obviously felt an extreme amount of love for Ava, but also showed extreme frustration with her behaviors, felt very realistic. That brings me to Thace and Ayo's relationship. Thace is the eldest sister. I love how Ayo's thoughts on Thace were written. The fact that she realized that Thace was nothing short of a bully to her and felt a version of hatred towards her, but she also still held love for her as her older sister added quite a bit to the story and Io's character. I also love Eddie and Io's relationship. The fact that the relationship could have turned out to be unbalanced and toxic based on the fact that Io could see the fate thread and Eddie couldn't, but instead Kika Hatsupolo did a wonderful job of taking what could have possibly been a negative element for the book and made it into something overwhelmingly positive, at least in my opinion. Hatsupolo made it so that the dynamic weighed heavily on Io, wove it into the dynamic between Ayo and Thace, as well as added tension of Ayo trying her hardest not to fall for Eddie and failing over and over again. Also, I loved Eddie as a character so very much. Like, I loved Eddie as a character. Finally, the world building and magic system. I loved it so much. I need to stop saying that actually. I said so much like 500 times. I honestly have no negative thoughts. The take on Greek mythology and the glimpse we see into other myths and beliefs that will possibly be showcased in the second book. The explanations of the powers and the scenes where Ayo used her powers were quite interesting and kept me gripped. The world that Hatsupolo built was very real, and I'm quite interested to learn more. So apparently, Threads That Bind is going to be a part of a trilogy, I think. The second book, the arc is out for that. I requested it on NetGalley, but I got denied. So I'm waiting on to see if Eloise will accept me. But that's it. Hi again. So I decided I'm going to split this video into two parts for like a couple of reasons. The first one is that if I just made it one video, it would be too long because of how many clips and arcs I'm discussing and how like many words I used to to talk about the arc. And then also it would take too long to upload because I'm not finished reading all the arcs, so I would have to like wait until I finish reading and then film the clips and do the reviews and stuff, and then I have to edit those again, and it would just take forever to come out. So the last book I'm going to be talking about is The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. Last year I read Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White, and I gave it 5 stars, and I decided, like, as soon as I finished it, that listen, Andrew Joseph White is going to be one of my autobiography authors because I love the book so much. So when I saw The Spirit Bears Its Teeth on, I think I found it on both Edelweiss and NetGalley, and I got approved because I didn't know if one of them was gonna deny me. So I requested on both sides just for some insurance, and I got approved on both sides. So I requested it because I'm like, Andrew Joseph White, he's added to my roster. I need to read his books. And I enjoyed The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. I gave it 4.5 stars. So this one, the synopsis says, London, 1883, the veil between the living and dead has thinned. Violet-eyed mediums commune with spirits under the watchful eye of the Royal Speaker Society. And 16-year-old Silas Bell would rather rip out his violet eyes than become an obedient speaker wife. According to Mother, he'll be married by the end of the year. It doesn't matter that he's needed a decade of tutors to hide his autism, that he practices surgery on slaughtered pigs, that he's a boy, not the girl the world insists on seeing. After a failed attempt to escape an arranged marriage, Silas is diagnosed with veil sickness, a mysterious disease sending violet-eyed women into madness, and shipped away to Braxton Sanatorium and finishing school. The facility is cold, the instructors are merciless, and the students either bloom into eligible wives or disappear. So when the ghosts of missing students start begging Silas for help, he decides to reach into Braxton's innards and expose its rotten guts to the world, as long as the school doesn't break him first. As I said, I gave this book 4.5 stars. While The Spirit Bears Its Teeth is a bit less action-packed than White's previous book, Hell Followed With Us, I enjoyed it all the same. Andrew Joseph White seems to have found his niche in writing trans characters fighting transphobia in their own way and escaping their brutal circumstances in gruesome but self-led ways. I loved Silas and his determination to take his life into his own hands. The way White wrote about Silas facing prejudice surrounding his autism, but also gave Silas bits of self-acceptance and an eventually accepting community was quite beautiful. I love the fact that the things like Silas's stimming, special interests, and stimulation issues were not only mentioned to be berated during scenes, which included ableism and physical or emotional abuse, but also just Silas accepting himself or finding bits of joy in these things. Another thing I found particularly interesting about the way White wrote Silas was the voice of the rabbit that tormented Silas, which seems to be like a personification of Silas's negative thoughts or intrusive thoughts. It was quite interesting to see it giving like being given like its own character. The other characters in this book were very well written and played off Silas well. The veil and the magic included in this book intrigued me quite a bit, and honestly, I would read another book with the same magic system set in the same world. Um, the magic system was well thought out. Andrew Joseph White stated that he took creative liberties with the historical elements, but these elements were obviously very well researched. Like when you read the book, you can tell he put a lot of thought into this and a lot of work into researching. Finally, I love the connections that Silas made in this book, both friendships and romantic connections. Silas found a community while suffering at Braxton Sanatorium and finishing school. Silas himself expressed both joy and frustration at these connections, stating that he was glad to find people like him, whether other trans people or other autistic people, but he hated the fact that these connections were found at such an awful place. While I love the relationship between Silas and Daphne and do understand the constraints of working around things like chaperones and the courting system, and also the fact that Silas was at a boarding school, I do wish there was a bit more development in the romance. Also, this clip is the second time I'm driving to and from school by myself. So I was very excited. So as I said, I'm going to be ending the video here and then doing another part that will hopefully be ready by next week. I don't know. With all the reading going and like I don't know what's going on, man. But this is part one. Regarding liking, commenting, and subscribing, do what you want. Bye.